Right, thank you. Well, hopefully with those words ringing in your ears, I'm going to hand over to Pippa Haley to try and capture, in the time we've got available, some of the feedback that we've had to this session.
Good, thank you very much. What I'm going to suggest is we have 3 questions and we have 10 groups. So I'm going to ask that the first 3 groups talk to us about question 1, and the second 3 question 2, and the third 3 question 3. And group 10 serves coffee. No. No. But after each group, I will ask the other groups if they've got anything to add, something that hasn't been mentioned on that particular question and they really think needs capturing. Just like to emphasise, we have Stephen, Paul, Sharon, others here from the Shared Planning Service who will be collecting all of this and making sure that it really is taken up. So all of your notes, please make sure that they are left here at the end. So if I can hear, and it's just sort of a taster of the real headlines that came out of your groups. So we have group 1, group 2 and group 3. If you could let us know, 1, 2, no, this is definitely group 2, group 3. Group 3? Yeah, okay, we'll go groups 1, 2 and 3. We'll talk about that first question, which is about zero carbon future and how does that relate to the green hinterland.
Thanks very much. I believe I've only got 2 minutes, so I'll be very quick.
1 actually.
Oh, good. Key response was it's important to relate to the green hinterland, but we mustn't forget the green inner land, the existing spaces within the city. The green inner land is as equally important as the green hinterland, so existing spaces within the city. If you are talking about the relationship to those green spaces, the key issue is access. How do people benefit from those spaces? So there's a wide-ranging number of issues about that in terms of transport network, sustainable cycling or walking routes so that you can actually get to those green spaces without needing to rely on gas-guzzling cars. Also encouraging a network of spaces so that there's a nucleus and corridors of green spaces which interconnect to make that access easier. Another proposal was that the local plan should try and encourage landowners to set aside land somehow through policy and be able to enforce that, so giving the local plan the teeth to be able to enforce these needs for spaces to be set aside, to be maintained, whether that's by the local authority or by the owners. We also talked about the idea of planned incursions into the green belt. So actually, rather than trying to just get people there and back, why don't we enable people to live and work where they're surrounded by the green spaces, so that there's no need to travel at all to get to them. So those are the key headlines. We spoke a lot about the transport, but
That's very good, excellent. Thank
Okay, we had 3 headings. One was transport, so we were very in favour of making it possible to cycle paths. Pricing on rail, we heard about three for £2 coming into Cambridge after normal hours, so people would on the rail system. We talked about nil parking provision for new building, and obviously the question of parking pricing, but that had to be matched with a carrot of available for better public transport. We discussed about electrification of transport. We were careful about the affordability of electrical cars and make sure they're available for everybody. And there were questions about the carbon footprint, so that needs a bit more examination. Housing refit was a very big area where we've just felt there's a very large amount of housing in Cambridge which is not yet properly insulated. There is no differentiation in council tax to reflect that. We looked also at the idea of housing materials, and there was some input on there. The question of mapping where the gas boilers are and when they will have to be changed over. And our sense was that private rental sector has got much poorer environmental performance than housing associations or councils or some of the more public bodies, and actually private owned seem to also to have better. So private rental sector is an area to look at. The final point was just actually reducing energy consumption, that what we were careful we weren't doing is just simply transferring it around. and that would basically say people sharing transport and going shorter distances, and particularly when you look at developing areas, co-location of, say, schools, GPs, and shopping and so forth, important to make sure that people could do all those tasks without having to move around so much.
Thank you. So to pick up, try and pick up three slightly different themes. The first was not so much an answer really, but a question about, at the minute, planning for Cambridge is done concentrically. So you have the city, and then you have the green belt, and then you have new towns beyond that. And whether or not that is the correct form for future development, whether we might want to think about wedges, for example, or whether new development should be centred around existing new towns which are already planned, and connecting along transport corridors. Second point we discussed was actually about food production and supply. Food production is very carbon intensive. Will agriculture change as a result over the next 30 years? Possibly. And are there opportunities for food to be produced more locally and supplied and distributed more locally? And then the third thing that I'd want to pick up, which we talked about then, was about Cambridge's knowledge economy and the giant data servers which are being constructed around Cambridge, which are very energy intensive use, but also produce a lot of heat. And the opportunity potentially to reuse that heat is not being captured. So someone suggested could actually, we have the data servers at the bottom or in the basement, and then they be used to heat the rest of the apartments above it, which might seem like a bonkers idea, but actually probably is quite sensible. So those are the 3 points that I think I want to make from our group. Thank you.
Good. Now just one other point from any of the other groups on that first question that hasn't been mentioned.
I think probably on the first point, I mean, one of the things that our group discussed a lot actually to start with is about growth, you know, our assumptions about growth itself. I mean, people were raising a great deal, do we want this growth, who's it working for, and should we be changing the focus? So a kind of a more fundamental challenge to the question.
Yes, okay, we shouldn't be starting where we are, we should be starting where we're going to be, and we've got to start thinking what we can't have. And the other point was about we quite a detail about the developing new houses and the cost embedded carbon in redevelopment, and putting houses down or building them up, but some good analysis.
Penny, can I just interrupt? Can I ask members of the panel to please state their names and the organisations they're from, just for the purposes of the camera and captions, please? Thank you.
Just on the additional we won't, when we go to the next round of questions we will, so just this additional one.
Hi, Group 4. We talked a lot about the issues of car parking in the city and coach parking, and the fact that the road space is largely taken up by cars. Particularly a concern that, you know, if we're going to make cycling safe, we should be doing something about that split. And then I think we got quite inspired because I've got an electric bike.
Who are you?
Mary Kids from Carpen, and it's a long way from Cambridge.
Good. So if we go now to the second question, and we'll start with Group 4.
Right.
So if you say now your name and who you're in, and the organisation as well. Yeah.
I'm Mary Kidston, and I'm a councillor from Carpen, the council, Carpen Village Council. We talked a lot about the way that Cambridge is developing, and particularly looking at how much we can get more green space, and then a discussion around the obligations to developers and the fact that they probably go away if you ask them to do too much. But there was definitely a feeling that open space and a joined up hierarchy and network of open spaces was what we needed for people to use the environment, be able to walk out from a city and enjoy that, and a recognition that this is an important part of mental health, particularly in young people.
Thank you. Group 5? Can you say your name?
Oh, so it's Penny Heath, Cambridge Past, Present, Future Heritage Watch Committee. The key points, I think, was evaluation, and are the existing studies fit for purpose? and do these reports like the spheres and the arcs, are they including climate change and environmental biodiversity as fundamental measuring aspects? I think we tried to get through optimism and cynicism. There was a slight cynicism that perhaps getting net biodiversity gains a slight get-out clause for developers, and it's got to be better than that. It's got to be a genuine net gain. We liked the idea of connecting more connectivity and natural green spaces and corridors, and of course hedges, which is something Cambridge is famous for, and our hinterland and local fields. It's part of our landscape. And slight sense perhaps local plans failed, and we've got to make it better by people making money out of it. It's got to benefit the actual people of Cambridge. There's a real sense of disconnect between the people of Cambridge and Cambridgeshire, the people who live Cambridgeshire. I'm very much district and city person, and the people have got to make money. We like a living economy, but it has got to find a way of getting benefits to people who live here.
Group 6.
I'm Debbie Bondy. I'm representing the Greater Cambridge Partnership. The key points of the discussion, that hopefully don't repeat too much what's been said, was a basic challenge in a way. Where's the new Wandlebury? So Wandlebury was, I understand, set up in the 1950s, or protected in the 1950s. And where are the new big things that we're doing? Where's that kind of legacy of something large and significant? I think we talked a bit about the use of spaces, and sometimes the feeling that spaces have to be put there for activity and people being active and keeping fit and all the rest of it. And we need to make sure the spaces are of sufficient size and type that people can use them for quiet times and reflection as well, and that's in the city and on the fringes of the city. There was also a major concern about greenwash, i.e. Developers putting in things that, frankly don't mitigate the full impact of a new development and so on, and are kind of superficial and don't address the whole issue. So it's not an afterthought or a straightforward quid pro quo, but something more substantial and meaningful. So I think, a couple of final points.
So just one more.
Yeah, sure. A real interest in making sure that we do focus on the diversity of species, both in developing our existing sites and new sites.
Thank you very much. Any other groups that want to add something, yes, on the second question around nature and the green spaces?
Yeah, I'm Philip Byler, Group 9. I work for the Greater Cambridge Planning. I just wanted to add that there's got a lot of discussion in the group about the sort of water capacity and environmental capacity generally, in that we do need to think about the water for the rich habitats as well as water being needed for development, and that is very much something which needs to be balanced going forward, in part because of the severe problems with aquifers in the area.
Sharon Brown, Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service. So there was a discussion in Group 8 about the importance, along with the Green Infrastructure Strategy, of looking very much at the joined up governance as well and land ownership, because a lot of projects don't come to fruition because of lack of join up and because of being prevented by land ownership. So along with this needs to sit a really good understanding of those types of issues.
From Group 2, we focused very much on agriculture. We thought this was kind of how do you get farmers to engage with this issue better. Clearly changes in CAP might help that, but not that.
Limited the local plan.
Yeah, water was a big concern.
For the record, Tom Foggin from RHP Architects and also Chair of RIDA Eastern Region. So a couple of quick points that Group 1 also raised was actually also encouragement at local level within communities and neighbourhoods is a good way to try and encourage it. But key to this is an ambition to double the amount of species-rich habitats, is defining the metric and ensuring that there's enforceability and accountability so that, I'm I'm not quite sure how that's enforced in policy, but a way to ensure that if a habitat is provided, actually seeing it does provide those additional species and habitat support systems that are needed.
Just on the back of that, there should be ecologists on giving guidance working within these committees. We have a lot of data sets about ecology. I'm also chair of a nature reserve, and we really need to build on 30-year records, see what we're doing.
Yes, on nature again, of course.
Your name?
Oh, sorry, Roger Mitchell, Metro Cambridgeshire, which is the local nature partnership. We talked quite a lot about nature in private gardens and spaces, and the point was made that a lot of rented property, the tenants aren't allowed to alter their gravelly drives and their paved over areas, and if they do they're in trouble. We also thought this about 5% biodiversity gain was far, far too low, and it is evident one could do much better than that. The towns and the villages are the green space of Cambridgeshire at the moment. If you fly over Cambridgeshire, this is what you see. The green oases, apart from the Great Fen and Wanterbury and places like that, are the towns and villages. And we can build on those, and it can be better than 5%.
Good, thank you. If we can go now to the third question, which is about the type of housing, alongside the zero carbon and nature. What have you thought about key worker and older people, old persons housing needs? So we've got group 7.
Hi, I'm Paul Frainer, so I'm from Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service as well. This was the last question, so we didn't have quite as much discussion, but certainly one of the themes running through was already building on what assets we currently had. The mention of the Cambridge Quality Charter and the 4 Cs, which obviously has some provision in there for key workers and making sure that actually what we've already done, we don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater as such. So that's really also feeds into the point of creating actual communities and how we do that more effectively to not ensure that we create disparity going forward in 5, 10, 15 years down the line. That kind of moved on to the sustainability of our existing villages and understanding essentially what those villages wanted to do and how they wanted to grow and the demands that are actually specific to them, because actually that would help. We did talk a little bit around definition of what key workers might be and how actually we need to consider our entire workforce rather than just those in the public sector or those in those key jobs, because there are a lot of low-paid jobs and jobs where English isn't people's first language that contribute and have a need and also are part of that economy. And one thing that probably cross-cuts all of those things, all of the 3 questions, was technology, which didn't get raised hasn't been raised previously, and how we use technology not only to engage with the different demographics of people and understand actual real demand better, but also how we look at the data and how it moves and how we then plan for that to address some of those demands.
Group 8, Sharon Brown, Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service. So in terms of a starting point, we thought it was really important when you're looking at housing strategy to focus on building communities. So make sure you have the housing located with the jobs and also with those supporting facilities. And we felt that that was really key. In terms of historically, we felt that the local plan policy had been too narrow in focusing on particular housing typologies and particular types of housing in particular locations. So very much wanting a more flexible, more adaptive approach in the local plan and allowing flexibility so that you have a range of sectors served by the new developments, and that you're really building on those mixed communities, so not only looking at key workers but also looking at other needs within the population at large. We had a discussion around key workers and housing for local people and what that meant, and there was a view about having some type of restriction that would enable a certain proportion of housing to be restricted for local people, but then obviously getting into an interesting discussion about how you would achieve that and who those local people were. There was very much a view that housing policy strategy and through the local plan needed to focus on addressing inequalities in housing, and then also about the importance of low carbon housing and again use of materials and making it as cost effective as possible.
Good, thank you. Group 9?
Group 9, Philip Bilo, Greater Cambridgeshire Planning. We started off just talking about the importance of key worker housing. So examples were given at Eddington and Adam Brooks. The importance of key worker housing for the university and also other employers, and the recognition that the private market can help to finance key worker housing. We moved on to the sort of broader needs issue about the SPEAR report, and concern was expressed about the levels of potential growth that were being discussed in the SPEAR report. It was felt that there was a need to tighten up the rules around affordable housing, and that how do we make sure that all developments contribute to affordable housing, perhaps reduce the threshold or seek financial contributions, that kind of thing. We wanted to make sure that all places planned were good places from a community perspective. There was some debate about whether Section 106 funding was sufficient these days for the infrastructure need going forward, and the recognition that the community infrastructure levy might be a good model for the area, looking more strategically and longer term infrastructure needs. And lastly, it was mentioned that it should not be forgotten that in thinking about housing needs, we must think about transport to and from those homes at all times. Thank you.
Thank you. Group 10?
I think it's all been said. On this subject, I mean, we certainly thought there needs to be a balanced population. So we don't want silos of just certain sorts of housing. We want integrated developments. But I think that's all been said, and it's such an obvious point, but it's not always achieved. I'd also like to say that coming down the stairs, there's that sign saying gravitational waves. I really hope that was a subtitle of this, which should be, because that's what we need to achieve all this. I mean, I've been in this field for many, many, many years, and it's a long game. But it seems to me we need some gravitational waves to get ahead on some of these things, and they're all, particularly on the nature side, and not always be trailing everybody else and not being reactive, but being much more proactive.
Good. Any others like to add anything? Yes.
Well, I've got the microphone. Our group picked up on the need for lifetime building, so that all buildings could be adapted through their life. And it was pointed out that the current local plan in South Cambs there's a requirement that only 5% of houses have to have a lifetime, whereas we'd like to see that go to 100% in the future.
Yes, this is Group 4, Mary Kidston again. Our group particularly picked up on in several of our discussions, but particularly in this, on the use of existing housing stock. We were saying, why couldn't we do more, the City Council particularly, on conversions, and particularly in relation to housing the elderly. And there was also a strong push on the elderly needing to be integrated into society, so that if we are doing large-scale new housing schemes or housing schemes in general, that you don't want people to be isolated, and that we should have integrated solutions.
Just picking up on our group, Matthew Brooke, Cambridgeshire Head. On this question of integration with older people, we felt there was a risk of pampering old people, and that we needed to make sure there was cohesion between young and old. That there was a suggestion that one of the ways in which we could do this is have a socially acceptable form of Airbnb, so that young people could actually rent rooms in older people's larger houses, and that might help things. The other point we discussed was the question of the role of housing associations, and this need for a kind of mutual sector, rather than just a commercial sector, in providing housing. Cambridge has a long history of housing associations, and working with them as part of the planning to think how they could start to deliver some of this kind of housing.
Just one very quick point. With the Group 1 also discussed policy that encourages new forms of housing models, which perhaps such as the co-housing model that was discussed earlier. There's a way that that can be delivered more affordably. And I also have a question in terms of policy, whether or not there can be a presumption in favour of those new housing models when applications are being considered.
We touched on historic civic planning and history are we repeating, and we need to perhaps plan for what does zero carbon going to look like, and perhaps the emphasis should be on central government policy. We need a really crystal clear change of central government policy. And also there was a nice footnote about how Cambridge has retrofitted things, including Fawcett. I haven't got the date, but Antony Carpen has a wonderful supply. They've retrofitted the sewerage system around Cambridge. It can be done. Let's be optimistic.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things, we had a group that was brought forth both radical and realistic comments, and one of them was that it doesn't all work, it doesn't all fit all our aspirations, something will happen, and was a plea to put not just GDP as our measure of success, but there is a movement globally to actually put well-being as our measure of success, and that if we measure and monitor that, then we'll give it more priority.
Thank you, and amazing your ability to really capture what was happening in your discussions and give it in such pithy and important ways. And I think just to sum up, what I was hearing there is the need spatially to look at corridors and the transport options within those, and that this needs to be integrated intergenerationally and all types, but also in terms of those different spaces that are around. And a fundamental question of what type of growth are we looking for, and what is the evidence base and the assumptions around the growth, and whether or not, or pick up on that last bit, whether well-being as well as GDP and doubling GVA should be part of the indicators in terms of where we're heading. In terms of the evidence base, there was a question of have we got the right evidence base, beyond, and there was the use of technology going forward, how we use technology to encourage and bring others in, but also to use better the data we have. How do we use existing ecological knowledge and data that's out there, and how do we engage with local communities? That there's a need for standards, new types and forms of housing to incentivise, and that in terms of going big, the spatial strategy, where are the big set-asides? How do you get the big set-aside? Where are the new Wandleberries? But where's the network of smaller local, that everyone has access and a right to access to local quality for well-being as well? And finally, then, in terms of capacity, that's environmental water capacity for all of this. So the question is not just how do we fit everything in, what don't we fit in? And I think that goes back again to what is it we're trying to achieve. And I think people were saying to me before this, and as well as Harry's point, this isn't add-on environmental stuff, this is real concern. And people have engaged very, very productively and positively, but there's an overwhelming sense of deep concern about how this gets taken seriously. And on that point, I will hand over, Stephen. Thank you very much, everybody.